Books capture our hearts. Often the characters that inhabit them do even more than that. Sometimes they even shape the person we want to be. My name is Seth. I'm a full-time fantasy author who makes YouTube videos about being an author. If this is something that you're interested in, make sure you go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the next video. Also, while you're at it, please leave a thumbs up on this video. It helps YouTube know that the content is awesome, and I really hope that you think that too. Today, I want to talk about the top 5 characters that I remember from my childhood who shaped the way I wanted to live my life. I know that's a really sort of extreme statement to make, that a fictional character might influence the way I want to live, but I think that a lot of people, if they reflected on the characters they've read about, and specifically the characters that they really loved, that they would find the same thing to be true. So these are 5 characters, mostly from when I was growing up, who impacted the kind of person that I wanted to become. These characters are in no particular order, but they all rank in my top 5. In the number 1 spot, we've got Hopalong Cassidy from The Trail to Seven Pines. There are a couple of books about Hopalong Cassidy, and he's a really interesting character because though the book that I read was written by Louis L'Amour under a pen name, the character was actually created by somebody named Clarence Mulford. And the character that Clarence Mulford made was actually incredibly different than the character Louis L'Amour wrote about. And that's because in between the 2 series was a movie, and the way the actor portrayed the character in the movie was completely different from Clarence's character. Where Clarence's character was this sort of brash, loudmouthed, hard-drinking, dangerous cowboy, Hopalong Cassidy was an entirely opposite vision. He was smooth, he was calm, he was collected. He was this older, silver-haired gunfighter who rode a white horse dressed in all black. Sort of the classic vision of the gentleman gunfighter in a lot of ways. And as a character, he was incredibly cool under pressure. He was in a lot of dangerous situations, as most cowboys and most westerns are, and he handled everything with perfect equanimity and ease. He also happened to be an incredible gunfighter, which, as a kid, just really grabbed my attention. But the thing about him that I think I wanted to emulate was that idea of being cool under pressure. The idea of, no matter the situation, being able to react in a way that was wise. And that's what Hopalong Cassidy did. And it also helped that he was an undisputed good guy in a genre that is littered with characters who might be doing something good, but are bad men. Hopalong Cassidy was different. He was a good man who also happened to have the strength to do what he needed to do. The next character shares some similarities with Hopalong Cassidy, but is also very, 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 very different. And that would be the Duke of Avon from These Old Shades. These Old Shades is a Regency romance written by Georgette Heyer. Heyer sort of invented the Regency romance genre and was one of my favorites. My parents collected all of her books, and I read all of her books. She wrote Regency romances, she wrote mysteries, and she wrote historical fiction. And the character of hers that stands out to me the most, and was a character in books that I read over and over and over again, was the Duke of Avon. So like Hopalong Cassidy, the Duke of Avon was very calm, cool, and collected. But rather than being good or heroic, he was really kind of a villain. He was cold and calculating and completely ruthless, like excruciatingly ruthless. You read those books and honestly, you're not sure whether you're reading about a good guy or a bad guy. You're not sure whether you should root for him or root for everybody else, because honestly, anybody who falls into his hands ends up suffering terribly. Additionally, he always dressed to the nines. He was always very fashionable, in fact, often setting fashion in the stories that he was in. Adding to that being fabulously wealthy, he's sort of this untouchable character, again, that you would really expect to be the villain of a story as opposed to a hero. So what did I love about him? Why did I resonate with him so much, and why did I want to shape my life in order to be like him? Really, it comes down to his ability to assess a situation and then react appropriately. And I know I sort of talked about that a little bit with Hopalong Cassidy as well. And it's sort of a different facet of the same thing. the ability to look at his situation and figure out what the best move was. And I really liked that about him. So now it's time to talk about the third character who I really resonated with and I wanted to adopt traits from. And that would be Thrawn from the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn, also known as Heir to the Empire. And those books were simply fantastic. And I remember reading them and thinking, wow, here's a guy who can go toe-to-toe with Jedi and with the Republic and is sort of scrabbling together pieces of this broken apart empire, and he is just outmaneuvering everybody. And what I loved about his character was not necessarily his brilliance, because I understood even as I read them, I'm not that smart. But what I loved was his ability to portray a gentleness and a kindness while taking the actions that he needed to take. He was ruthless, but not in a mean way. And something about that really struck a chord with me. As I was thinking about this character, I found myself really attracted to the idea of doing what needs to be done, but doing it not in sort of a heavy-handed way, but with a light touch. So that character, the character of Thrawn, really stood out to me when I read those books as the sort of person that I might like to be. Number 4, we have a little bit of a pivot, and that would be Tiffany Aching from The We Free Men. The We Free Men is a book written by Terry Pratchett, who is absolutely one of my favorite authors of all time. But Tiffany's character is particularly interesting. Tiffany is a young girl who grows up in the Chalk, which is sort of a Highlands-esque area, and her family raises sheep, and her grandmother, who has recently passed away, happens to have been a witch. And the story is really about Tiffany coming into her own and discovering her own abilities and powers and learning how to use her gifts and her talents in order to get those things done. And I don't know if you can see a theme here, but her character was absolutely a favorite of mine because she would simply do what needed to be done. And if she didn't know how to do it, she would figure out how to do it. And I really admired that. As someone who lacked a lot of confidence in my ability to do things, that sort of go-get-'em attitude, which wasn't flashy, she didn't always do things right, but she worked at it. And eventually, she was able to do it. That just really grabbed a hold of me and really resonated with me. And so she's a character who, as I read about her in high school, I really thought to myself, man, this is the kind of person, these are the kinds of attitudes that I want to have as well. And then the fifth and final character that I'm going to be talking about today is Tintin. Tintin, who is the star of The Adventures of Tintin, a series of comic books by George Remy, is a young Belgian reporter who goes on a bunch of adventures with his dog, Snowy. And Tintin is amazing. Though Tintin isn't physically imposing, he's absolutely fearless. And he doesn't just stand by in the face of injustice. So even though he goes on all these crazy adventures and gets involved with all of these crazy people and is often in these incredibly dangerous situations, he never hesitates to stand up for what's right and seek the truth. And that was particularly the thing that I loved about him, his desire to get to the truth, to investigate and to get to the bottom of what was really going on. And that's a philosophy that I loved and I wanted to emulate as I grew up. It's honestly really fascinating to think back over your life and think about the media that you've consumed, the books that you've read, and think about the characters in them, and see if you can trace where your own ideas, your own principles come from. Often I find that when I identify a particular thought or a particular way of living in my life, it can honestly be traced back to characters in books that I read. If you do this exercise, I'd love to hear about your characters. Who shaped you? What characters influenced the way you live now? Let me know down in the comments below because I'd love to check those books out. That's it for today, and I'll see you next time.